So we're going to we're going to work through the panel and do introductions as we go. But we have Dame Wendy Hall, welcome. Jeni from the Open Data Institute. Ryan, who's here from Blockstack, and Dr. Julia Shaw from Spot. And we're going to kick off with Dame Wendy Hall, who's going to talk about her perspective on the challenge and the issues around privacy in this increasingly AI era, and kind of the story so far over the last 10 years that brought us up to a very key event that happened recently, which is the adoption of GDPR regulation. Over to you, Wendy.
I'm not going to talk about GDPR per se.
No,
talk about it.
Jeni is. Yeah.
I thought you were going to say the last 10 years of AI, because AI has been around for a lot longer than that. So I'm Wendy Hall. If you don't know who I am, look me up in Wikipedia. Which is pretty accurate, actually. It's more accurate than my website. I'm a professor of computer science at the University of Southampton, and it's the privilege of an academic to be able to talk about whatever they like, really. But I'm here probably not because AI was the first. I started my career in computer science. I was a mathematician originally, pure mathematician, which I loved. Beautiful world. But for reasons I won't bore you with now, I moved into computer science in the era of the personal computer, and I started working on things we used to call, and still do, I think, intelligent tutoring systems, which in 1980 on a Sinclair Spectrum was quite a hoot, really, looking back on it. On a BBC B, I don't know how many of you remember BBC B computers, but we were producing intelligent tutoring systems using Prolog as a programming language. But the point I'm trying to make is that AI is as old as the hills. It's older than computing itself. And people have had this vision of what might be long before there were computers, when machines could think and be clever. And I've never been a real an AI researcher in terms of developing new technologies, but I've been an applied researcher for most of my career in terms of using AI technologies as they have evolved. But much more recently, I was asked by the UK government to chair a review of AI, and I suspect that's why I'm sitting here today and why I'm talking all over London this week, because everyone wants to know what's happened with it. And that was published in October last year, and then if people were wondering what happened to it, we were announced as an AI sector deal in November, and then there was a slight pause in things while the government decided what it was going to do. And about 6 months later, so the end of April, the AI sector deal was launched, by which time several other countries have produced AI policy statements. So actually that was good for us because it meant the government put more money in. We were announced as an AI sector deal to the tune of £1 billion, which is made up of some new money from the government for research and training, money from industry and money from academia, efforts going in to grow the AI sector in the UK, and our report was very much about growth of jobs and the economy, looking on the optimistic side and how we could get more people working in this area, encourage more startups, help the startups, and help them grow in the UK, rather than having to have their main business model as selling to Google. So how does that relate to the title of this panel? Well, as the other thing I think I should mention before I just get to that is, as part of the government announcements, they did announce the creation of a Centre of Data Ethics and Innovation. That came out of a Royal Society report that I also happened to be on the working group of, but that was a kind of a coincidence. That report was published last June, and alongside the sector deal for AI, the government announced the setting up, the funding was in the budget for the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. That still hasn't been formed as such. It is emerging, as is the Office for AI in DCMS and BIS. Meanwhile, the Nuffield Foundation have announced a ethics research centre at Oxford with Luciano Floridi, and several companies in this sort of vacuum, as I see it, in the UK, are announcing data policy or AI policies. And there's a huge, huge conversation going on, which is why we're here, about who has the rights to do what with your data. And at the moment, when we talk about our online identity, there is not a single identity. We have an identity with each of the social network platforms that we belong to. We have some data that we store and keep ourselves, but even that, most people put that on whatever their favorite social networking platform is and assume someone else is taking care of it, and it's all over the place. And that we've had the major stories come out about what, a year ago or 2 years ago, the media was all into what is the government allowed to do with our data. And how much you've got the privacy versus surveillance issue, and wherever you come on that debate, I think we've got a fairly healthy situation in the UK compared to some countries. And wherever you sit on that debate, that's nothing compared to what the companies are doing with our data. And we always knew this, it's just it wasn't in our consciousness. And what has happened is it's come into our consciousness with the stories of what Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, and there's going to be lots of stuff in the courts about who knew what and who was responsible for what. But the bottom line is they did stuff with your data that you didn't know about, and they sold to make money, and who knows what effect it might have had on the democratic process or whatever. And these are issues that are majorly important for us, and we've known about this for a while. And my main research area, I'm Executive Director of the Web Science Institute at Southampton, and Web Science is all about studying the ecosystem, the digital ecosystem that was very much came about because of the invention of the World Wide Web, but has got huge, big since. Looking at that from a socio-technical point of view, because my thesis is, and our thesis is, that computer scientists and computer programmers, machine learning programmers, can't decide the future of the ethical policies the government or a company has on data. We as a society have to work that one out. And that issue is only just coming to our consciousness. And the thing is, we do have choices. We choose whether to belong to a social network platform or not. And going forward, companies are going to have to, because of GDPR coming in, which is a huge step in the right direction, going to have to declare what they do with our data and how they're using it. But of course, if you go to the US or China, which is another whole ball game, they've gone for mass surveillance. The US is all about market forces. And they say they're taking huge note of GDPR, but it's very much market forces that win in the US. It's the big companies, not just the social network platforms, that lobby their politicians to get the laws through. And whoever lobbies best tends to get the answer they want. And, in the US, that's a sort of the way the system is. And I think it's very interesting how all this is going to pan out globally, because remember, this AI sitting on top of the internet is a global thing, and we have to think about it from that point of view. Is that enough for now?
That's perfect. That's absolutely fabulous. I'd love you to just talk a little bit more about the recommendations in the paper, especially the concept of a data trust and what that really is.
It's so long ago now since we wrote them. No, I know them all off by heart. When we were given less than 4 months to produce our review, which is a nothing in terms of the amount of issues you might want to look at, but we were very focused on job creation and economic growth. And we couldn't consult with everybody because there wasn't time. But we had a lot of very fast and furious working group meetings, and people in this room will have been at them, or working meetings. And we asked people what they thought were the best issues, the most important issues in, this whole, what are the problems startups have, what are the problems big companies, how do we get existing companies to adopt AI, what are the training and skills needs. And the top of the list was always the sharing of data in legally sound, safe, and in a secure, trusted way. And the startups all said to us, if it's not open data, it might be might be shareable in some way, or totally, something you've got to really take care of in a data vault that's so secure nobody can look at it. But we, as a startup, we cannot get access to the big data sets we need to train our algorithms. So we know there's lots of people and lots of ways, technical ways, to deal with the issue of sharing data in a safe and legal, ethical framework. We weren't looking at the technical issues. We thought, well, we want those to bubble up. What the companies said to us was, we can't afford the lawyers. We can't write the contracts with the big companies. And the same for research labs. And it's all about, well, okay, if we could do this work under GDPR, it's got to be very well defined. What happens to the derived data? What happens to the results? Who can do what with the resulting data? Whose IP is it if you've done this work on it? All those issues all got to be worked through. And so we wrote about the concepts of data trust support organisation. It might not be called that, but it was the idea that there will be an office, there is an office for AI in DCMS and Biz. It's growing now, and there'll be legal advice available to people. And it could be sector by sector, so it might be that there'll be advice for health sector that's different for, say, the aeronautical sector or the transport sector or they're sort of same, but anyway, you know what I mean, the energy sector might have to be, and then there's also, so there's the verticals, but also the horizontal stuff. And, we want the Office for AI to be somewhere where companies and individuals and research labs can ring up or email, sorry, old-fashioned term, be telepathic with and say, what do I do in this situation? Can you help me? And is there a template I can use, and that sort of thing.
And that's going to be crucial for unlocking the innovation, especially small companies, but big companies as well. But
yes,
small companies need that access to shared data sets in order to train the algorithms and actually deliver this innovation. Yeah. Because otherwise you have this dilemma that only the companies who have amassed this huge amount of data
and remember
can
what
do it.
Triggered this I think there's two things triggered the AI review in the UK. One was DeepMind, and the Royal Holloway data, and then DeepMind being sold to Google. I can't remember which way around it was, but anyway, it was that sort of debate. And then, because this was before Cambridge Analytica was known about publicly, and then there's also, they all went to Davos and read the book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution by Schwab, and they all came away from Davos, January 2017, thinking we need to be in this or we're going to be not part of the future. I think that book's been the cause of all sorts of things. Every developed country I know is developing an AI strategy or policy. A lot of them look like ours, which is very flattering.
Very flattering, and it's great to see the UK taking such a leading position on this.
Well, it was taking a lead, and I think it will get back again once we get on track.
Brilliant. So thank you for that, Wendy. That's a perfect kickoff to the panel. Jeni, where have we gotten to? Because it's a pretty big thing, GDPR coming in, and be great just to hear more broadly about the work that you're doing at the ODI. And obviously you've got a presence here if people want to come and learn more, and then specifically GDPR.
Cool. Hey everyone, I'm Jeni Tennison. I'm CEO at the Open Data Institute. We're a not-for-profit that help companies and governments to manage data better and trying to build an open and trustworthy data ecosystem. So I think a lot of what Wendy talked about was around data flowing to people who need it in order to make better decisions, and that's basically that's basically how we unlock the power of data. Is the way of helping us to make better decisions. But while we're doing that, we also need to manage the kind of harmful impacts that can come about from that data flowing where it shouldn't go, or being used in ways that we as society decide that we don't want that to happen. For ODI, it's been interesting few years. So we were founded about 6 years ago, and you can kind of tell from the name, the Open Data Institute, that we were built off the back of being of looking at open data and looking at the power that can come when data flows to where it's needed. But it's really become clear over the last few years that you can't talk about data flowing openly and being as open as possible without also talking about how we build trust in data. And we saw the 2012 type of time, then there was a big push from government around open data. Now we're in 2018, and there's big push around data ethics, around control of data, and GDPR is kind of part of that. When I look at GDPR, I think I kind of split it up into three kinds of areas. There's the area that's really about kind of negative control, I call it. So it's the control that people have to stop data about them being used in ways they don't want it to be used. So that's withdrawing consent, objecting to particular uses, and so on. But then more interestingly, then there's also quite a lot around positive control. So being able to access data or being able to port data from one organization that has it, either to yourself or to another third-party organization. And that's one of the places where both you get the real power and opportunity for data flowing more easily, but you also get the big prospect of breaches of that data flowing in places that it shouldn't flow to. And you can kind of see Cambridge Analytica as being an example of a place where good data portability from Facebook was used in an uncontrolled way, which meant that we got bad privacy impacts. So negative control, positive control, and the third thing from GDPR is all about transparency. And I think that this is the bit that is, in some ways, most important. It's going to be the longest lived thing. I think that GDPR has within it a real sense of individualistic rights around data. So you often, people will talk about your data, my data, that it's only about one person and that one person should have control. But in fact, what we see in the natural way of permissions being granted around data is that either individuals don't have the capacity, capability, understanding in order to really make informed choices about what should happen with their data, but also that their data is not only about them. And that's the bit that I think is most interesting for kind of going forward. Any data, almost every data that is about an individual is also about everybody else connected to that individual. The most obvious example is Facebook example, where data about you is also data about your friends, it's data about your family, that network is about more than one person. But you can also see it in, recommendations on Netflix. They're not just about you, they're about your household and the other people that you watch TV with. Or when you're doing grocery shopping, that isn't just data about you, those goods, that's also data about everybody else who eats with you. And in fact, you take it further, data about me and my medical records is not just about me, it's about the doctors and nurses that treat me. Data that's my DNA is not just about me, it's about my family. Take it further, data about me is not only about me, it's about every middle-aged white woman who's a data geek, right? We have these things in common, and the power of data is that we can derive insights because of what we have in common. But what that means is that data that's about me is not only about me. And any insight that you get about me, you also get about any of the rest of you here that are women data geeks. So we've been doing work around this in ODI. These are the kind of places that we think are really interesting. How do you, as Wendy was touching on, how do you get to share data so that it flows to the right people so that people can make decisions on it, but in a way that's trustworthy and that people can feel confident about? How do you make sure that people are communicating clearly and well about the way and being transparent about the way in which data is being used, such that we can not only take individualistic choices, but also take choices as groups and as societies about the use of that data? And we have a data ethics canvas that helps you walk through some of those choices. And the final piece of work that I just wanted to point to is this stuff around multiple people. How do we design systems that enable consent where there's more than one person who's involved in that data? And we've been doing some great work with projects by EF, looking at the kinds of interfaces and designs you might have to build into your systems in order to really tackle that issue of getting consent from multiple people. So that's my kind of overview of the stuff that we've been working on. I think from a GDPR perspective, the individualistic stuff, which is all of the stuff that you've been getting in your emails around consent, et cetera, that's not going to be as long-lived, I think, as the impacts that come from data portability, the ability to move data from one place to another really easily, and the impact of transparency and the need for us to communicate clearly and well to the people whose lives are affected.
Thank you, Jeni. That was a fantastic summary of the key issues. We're going to switch over to this end of the panel. Julia, you have a very different perspective on data and information from both sides of your life, the research side as well as your new venture Spot.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Jeni, a lot of what you're saying ties so well into what I'm about to say, so thank you for switching right to me. I'm a memory scientist. I'm a different kind of geek. But we work with data as human beings as well. Our brains have to process data all the time. And so my interest comes as a memory scientist, what can we learn for AI and for our interaction with AI from human brains? And so in particular, I've spent about 10 years studying false memories. So false memories are when we remember things that didn't actually happen. And so I sometimes use the term, I'm a memory hacker. So I bring you into the lab and I implant false memories in your brain. Now, the way that I do that is through basic human processes like imagination, like abusing trust, really. So you think that I know something about your life that you've forgotten, and you trust that I'm going to help you remember it. I like to use the term, if you're ever in an experimental study with a psychologist and they say, would you like me to help you? Always be cautious, because it's a trick. But where I am right now is I was studying the problem in particular in interrogations and investigations. When something emotional happens, something autobiographical and emotional, and this is where we touch on identity. When something happens that is a building block for your identity, for who you are, that's the stuff that interests me and how we remember it. And we know that police interviewing and memory interviews can go incredibly wrong and can distort the way that you remember that information. And for criminal proceedings or for certain kinds of emotional events, accuracy is critical. So how do we preserve accuracy? Brains are great at abstraction, they're great at getting networks, they're great at sort of higher level thinking, they're not good at precision. But you know what's great at precision? And really good at remembering stuff exactly the way you wrote it down? Computers. And so after 10 years of studying the problem and saying your brains are pretty bad at remembering the precise information from important emotional events, I recently co-founded a startup called Spot, which is an automated cognitive interview. Now, the cognitive interview is best practices in memory interviewing. There's been over 20 years of research on this scripted, which is really great for a chatbot, scripted technique being the best possible way to reliably extract accurate information about important emotional events. Now, what we've done is we've automated that, and we've made it an interactive chat. And it's not just about automating a process, it's about making it better, because humans are really bad at sticking to scripts. Humans also have a lot of biases and assumptions. They might judge whether they think you're telling the truth, whether what you're saying is accurate. A bot is just there to record what you're saying, and it has as much time as you need. And so the bot, in this case, we created to help people record and report workplace harassment. Something emotional and negative happens at work, where do you go? You can go to talktospot.com. It walks you through best practices in memory interviewing, and it turns your memory into evidence. It turns your memory into something tangible and shareable, into a PDF that has recorded all the important details that you can then, whenever you're ready, share with your employer, and your employer can also do more with that. And in terms of the three things I want to say about identity and memory and this panel and why it all fits together in such a strong way, is I think that For one, this was touched on by both of you, I think we fundamentally need to reconceptualize what we mean when we talk about identity. You are your online identity. There is no longer me offline and me online. That distinction isn't nearly as clear as we probably think about it. The second thing that's related to that has to do with how your brain works. And as we create the internet and structures online to increasingly be neural networks, to increasingly resemble how the brain works and stores information, I think we might need to change our expectations around what privacy means. If I say something in this room, I'm saying things in this room, my expectation is not that if I say something I don't like, I can go into your brains and delete it. That's not my expectation, because that's not going to happen. And at this point, that information is in your brain. You go outside, this is what you're saying. It's not just my data, it's not just your data. That data is in the world and can go into all kinds of other networks. It's out of control. Now the question is, as we build online spaces to be more like these neural networks, should we be having the same kinds of assumptions? Because really, once these pieces are there, can we regulate them meaningfully, especially when we're talking about learning algorithms? The algorithm has already learned. If you decide to take that back, it's already forever changed. Now the final thing is, and in terms of that, what do you do about that? I think the only thing you can do is control what's going into the internet, control what people are sharing, and the transparency. Take an approach of radical transparency to what data you're collecting, what you're storing, and what you might be doing with it. And sort of as a bonus fourth, I think the only way we can get to that is technological and digital literacy. Right now, in schools and in universities even, the amount of attention that's paid to actually educating people on what data actually are, what are we talking about when we're talking about identity in our online lives, there's almost no conversation. There is sort of within very small fields, like here. But outside of that, people don't even know what we're talking about, what they're supposed to be protecting. Just like you wouldn't accept that children aren't taught how to read and write, why are we accepting that children aren't taught how to appropriately understand and harness the internet? So that's what I wanted to contribute.
Fantastic. Thank you, Julia. And there's one little piece I wanted you to reference. So at Spot, one of the things I remember you saying is you don't actually store a copy of the memory that they've captured through your scripted process.
Right. So correct. So this cognitive interview bot, the approach that we're taking, partly because the information that we're collecting is incredibly sensitive.
Of course.
Now that's true for a lot of companies. More true for some than others, but all we're collecting is sensitive data. Now in that sense, both in terms of a risk for us and a risk to the individual who's using it, our approach is to essentially store nothing. So if you have a chat with our bot, we don't store the data. We can see your flow of questions, so when you've stopped using or answering questions, but we can't see what you've responded. We don't keep PDF copies. If you lose your password to your encrypted file, we don't have it. Now there's issues in terms of how happy users are with that, but it's, I think, the only way to really resolve it is that if we get hacked, you're not going to find anything.
Right. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Ryan, last but certainly not least, you live in a different world. You're pioneering this very powerful technology stack, Blockstack. Just tell us a little bit about the vision that you guys have of where you think the future might head towards and how far we are heading down that.
Totally.
And obviously, not everybody believes in the blockchain thing, so you've probably got a mixed audience here, but go for it.
Totally, yeah. So as mentioned, I'm Ryan Shea, co-founder of Blockstack, and what we're trying to do is remake the internet around people being able to own their entire digital lives. And that means that people are able to own their data, they can own their identity, really everything. They're in control of their interactions on the internet. And we're trying to flip the model from the traditional model that we're used to, where we interact with applications and all of our data is stored in the databases that these companies maintain, right? For example, if you think about it, you're using Facebook along with billions of other people. There are Facebook data centers with the data for all of those billions of people together, right? As
in one place.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. In one place, they have multiple data centers around the world, but the point is that there's still there's still, and there's multiple backups and all this other stuff, but there's like a massive data silo that really has all of the information for all of us around
concentration
the world. Exactly.
Of all, yeah.
And I mean, that was something that was developed. This like client-server model. We increasingly relied upon it because it made a lot of sense at the time. And we're really trying to rethink that and move to a model where we're in more control and where we store our data in a private cloud and we access it with keys that are stored on our devices and that we are in complete control of, our phones and our computers. And we have a secure identity that we can bring with us across all of our applications. We also have the ability to mask our identity and use different personas and things like that. So you can have trade-offs between, you can have a certain level of privacy and not actually disclosing to actors who you are, and at the same time have the ability to prove certain things about you and prove that you are who you say you are.
And just make that real for us. So where's this data stored? So it's not stored in a central server now. Where is it?
So when you sign up for Blockstack, we will give you this private cloud. It's you get a server that's online and all your data is encrypted with keys on your device. You can sign up for another service provider and get one somewhere else. And you can also
host done on your mobile?
Yeah, exactly. So on your phone or on your computer, you can also have one in your house. If you have your own personal server at home, you can do that as well. The point is that you keep it with any service provider you want. It can be on a server on Amazon. It could be on a server on DigitalOcean or any other cloud provider, or at home, and it's encrypted with your own keys.
And
then you provision that data.
That? Yeah. So tell us. So how do other people get access to it? Now it's on your own personal cloud.
So the way it works is you share your information with other people that you interact with. And another important point to think about is that the applications actually run on your device, and for most things that actually don't need servers, they don't need APIs. They really only need the API for your personal cloud server. So like, imagine there's actually a chat app on top of Blockstack called Stealthy, and it's completely decentralized, peer-to-peer. If I chat with you, my chats are encrypted with my key and encrypted with your key, and then they get sent to your personal cloud, and you have the ability to access them. So the important thing there is only the two of us can decrypt that information. And
nobody else.
And nobody else. And the data wasn't even sent to any company's servers. It was only sent to your private cloud and to mine. Right. So there's two things that I want to talk about here. One is the control of data that gives us increased privacy. I think that's really important. The other side of this is that we are going into a future where it's going to be, it's becoming more and more difficult to ascertain who people actually are. And so verifiable identity is more and more difficult. Even things like being able to see someone in person are going to be less and less reliable. And the most reliable aspect of identity that we actually have right now is something that's historically provable. So like if you have a private key that was, for example, distributed to you, and you can prove that it's always been in your possession and hasn't been compromised, then that could actually be more trustworthy than interactions with you or any kind of proof about your physicalness or any. So a lot of our aspects of our identity are becoming called into question. So we have to think very carefully about what identity in the future means, and also what privacy in the future means. And I'll say one more thing. What we're really trying to do is build an entire platform for different companies to build applications on top of a stack that uses this new model. So for example, in your case, you guys are working with data that is very sensitive. You don't want to collect the information, and you have a situation where if the information is irrecoverable because the person loses their key, there may be a way to get them to recover that. And so we've worked on ways that you can have different devices and have different recovery mechanisms because you set up the user's keys on different devices. And so we're helping businesses like yours to be able to build things in a way where they don't have to collect any data, and they can allow the user to be in control.
Fantastic. So dealing with that complexity for people.
Yes.
Fantastic. So Wendy, you were right. We're going to run out of time on this panel very quickly, and we've just extended a little bit, which is very naughty of me. Organizer's prerogative. But I want to come back to you because we've covered an incredible array just in a very short period of time there. And it was great to have your opening, and Jeni, for you to talk about where we are right now and the big issues. Julia's like right there on the forefront with an app who's having to deal with very sensitive data. And Ryan, what you're describing there is, I mean, it sounds quite utopian and fantastic, right? So I guess, Wendy, I wanted to give you the opportunity to comment on what's been discussed.
Put all that together.
Yeah, and what I think everybody should have an opportunity to have a closing remark, but I wanted to come back to you first. But in particular, one of my questions for Ryan is around, is this real now? Is it scalable? Because it sounds amazing. But coming back to data trust and the idea of who should be the person we trust to administer our personal data, what's your thinking on that right now?
Well, what I'm thinking after hearing Ryan talk is, and I'd love him to answer your question actually, but maybe he will before we finish. You're into the open versus closed world, and there's a lot of people trying to GDPR is a step in this direction. Tim Berners-Lee's working on Solid, which is social link data, which is the let's give everybody the way to have their own data, and then you choose how to link, how to connect, which networks to form and how to connect. Now, he will be doing that from a point of view of open standards and a model that everyone can use. And what's important in terms of what Ryan's doing is it reminds me, and I know it's light years away, but before the web, many of us were doing hypertext systems. And what Tim got right, although we're all living with the consequences now, and he, like everybody, says it needs fixing, but what he got right at the time was it was open universal standards and he gave it away for free. That's what made it work. And so somehow or other, we've got this, clearly you've got the commercial activity going on, trying to do what you're doing, and somehow or other we need this underlying infrastructure that means it can all link up, because I think this we have to have, if we're going to have control over our own data, we have to have someone that looks after it for us. A bit like we trust the banks, or we still do actually, despite 2008, we still trust the banks to look after our money because there's no better way to do it. But money, and of course that's going in a hugely different way now.
It's Bitcoin.
Well, it's crypto, right? Totally. It may or may not be Bitcoin, but it's going crypto. But the thing about money is it's a universal standard that somehow the banks, and so you've got to have the commercial players have got to have a standard to which they can all work, or it won't work. Because your company will not win this war.
So that's a fascinating thing, maybe, and maybe we can come back to Ryan, because...
And I'd love to talk about the memory stuff as well.
So I guess there's a challenge there is, does this have to be some kind of open standard? And Ryan, it'd be great for you to feedback in terms of, is it, your model, is it open source? Is it usable by others? What's the commercialization model? But I think you touched on something, Wendy, which is, forefront of my mind is, who is that person? Who is by analogy, the bank that we're trusting? Is it going to be the tech giants that you trust to manage your identity with potentially a Blockstack-based solution? Or is it going to be some other third party? Is it the state? Or are there going to have to be some new third parties that manage our data on our behalf?
Like lawyers.
Like Rory?
Lawyers.
Lawyers, yeah. Could be lawyers. Ryan, what's your point of view on that?
Well, so I'll answer a few. There's a bunch of questions in there. First, all our software is open source. At least all the software that we provide for our platform, and
so it's freely usable by anybody.
Freely usable. You can use it today. You can use a decentralized chat application today. You can use this alternative to Google Docs today, where there's all the docs are on your personal cloud, and they've never hit Google servers or anything like that. And also, Google doesn't have the ability to censor or shut down your documents.
They hit your servers.
Sorry?
They hit your servers.
They are stored in your personal cloud. We provide, we do host some. So yes, in certain...
Someone's got to host a cloud. They aren't exactly, just fluffy things that sit up here
we host
somewhere.
them for a lot of people, but we encourage people to host their own. Yes.
Okay. So where do you make your money then?
We currently don't pursue revenue. However, I will say one thing that we do is we actually have a blockchain that we use to register identities. And there's a cryptocurrency that is involved there. And so our business model is tied to that.
This is sorcery stuff, okay?
And so my personal view is we want to get to the point where people can get as close as possible to managing their data without any other third parties. And it's difficult. At the end of the day, there will always need to be data. There will always need to be software that is shipped to these end consumers. But if we can get it to the point where it's closer to something like a Bitcoin wallet than like a bank, where you just happen to use the software and there's no like custodian of such, then that's a much better situation than a bank where they have the ability to run away with your money and so on.
Fantastic. Look, this conversation obviously could go on for so much longer, and I wish we had more time. What I'm going to do is just ask each of the panel members to just summarize, whether it's a blockchain-based or another based model for the future. I'm going to start just with Jeni. Where do you see the future? What should we be striving towards to get this right?
So I think that we have to recognize that data is going to be flowing everywhere and that our level of control over it is going to be actually pretty minimal. And that means that what we need control over is how it gets used more than how it gets collected or stored. And I think that's the big challenge for us, how we frame how that gets used. I'm on another session in like 7 minutes' time. If you want to come hear more about that, it's on the emerging tech track.
Perfect. Thank you. Julia, tell us, what are your thoughts? Where do we need to go to? I mean, you've obviously built a system where there isn't a central store of data without blockchain, right? So is blockchain part of your vision?
I mean, I would very much like to talk to you.
Absolutely.
I think that, I mean, we're very new, so we're still dealing with these issues, and we are trying to find solutions to better tackle. So how do you verify people, and how do you store information that's sensitive? And our approach is radical transparency in the sense of, if we do store anything or send anything to anyone else, share your information with anyone else, you have to explicitly tell us. It's not you might accidentally, you can't accidentally share your data. And I think that, for me, I sort of disagree with you on this one, Jeni. I think we can manage and go into building systems with a different mindset, saying we will take the approach of collecting as little data as possible for as little time as possible, and that can help.
Wendy, any more thoughts from you?
Well, I think these guys who are pioneering this, huge credit to you. I can make cheap comments here on the stage for effect. Huge credit, because people have got to try this stuff, and we've got to see what works. So huge credit. We've got a long way to go before we get anywhere. And I wanted to link back to your work on memory stores, because there's a lot of science fiction stuff in this area, and it's so fascinating. Can you delete people's memories? Should we be able to do this? And we already have it in a little way with the right to forget and all that. But I'm another book I've read that's hugely inspired me is Philip Pullman's novels. And actually what we're doing here is building our demons. That's a very interesting choice of word of his.
Great book.
Ryan, you get the last word. And I've got a question for you. Are there lots of platforms like yours, so we're going to have lots of different block stacks? And, or we all going to be on Blockstack?
That's such a good question to finish on.
There's many.
Because I think going back to your point about Tim and the original web, I mean, one, it was open, but two, there were lots of different providers.
Yeah, so I'd say there's a lot of different, there's so many businesses and so many projects, communities that are working on things in this area. I would say we're somewhat unique in the exact type of stack that we provide, which is this personal cloud that covers everything from identity, authentication, storage, all the way up and down. Mm-hmm. But there are so many different communities and projects around cryptocurrency, owning your wealth,
identity,
around identity. Yes, there's a lot of identity projects.
Okay.
There's a lot of projects around owning your data. There are projects for decentralized data. There's Solid. There's IPFS. There's projects in Ethereum. There's Uport for identity. There's all these different projects, and there's many different areas where there can be standards. And what we're doing is we're just looking to help pioneer this, and we're working with many other groups to converge on standards. So I think there's a lot of efforts, but we want to be able to work together.
So you've got to do it from a socio-technical perspective, because you can't most people can't decode what you're saying, right?
trying to give a survey.
So thank you to host, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to our panel.